She was alone, panicking, about to give birth, and no one was helping until he appeared. A homeless man, carrying nothing but courage, stepped in. What happened next shocked everyone who witnessed it, changing lives forever and proving that heroism has no address. This is the incredible true story of Marcus Thompson, a 47-year-old homeless veteran living on the streets of downtown Chicago, and Victoria Sterling, the wife of tech billionaire Richard Sterling. Their paths crossed on a cold December evening in 2023, during what should have been the most vulnerable moment of Victoria's life. What unfolded in those critical minutes would challenge everything people thought they knew about heroes, dignity, and human compassion. The unlikely hero, Marcus Thompson, hadn't always lived on the streets. Just 5 years earlier, he was a decorated army medic who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, saving countless lives under fire. But when he returned home, the transition proved impossible. PTSD, combined with a lack of proper support systems, led to job loss, then apartment loss, and eventually homelessness. By December 2023, Marcus had been living in doorways and shelters around Chicago's Loop District for nearly 2 years. Despite his circumstances, he maintained the dignity and skills that had made him an exceptional medic. His military training never left him. He could spot medical emergencies from a block away and still remembered every protocol he'd learned about emergency childbirth. On most days, Marcus could be found near the corner of State and Madison, where morning commuters would occasionally drop change into his worn baseball cap. He was invisible to most people, just another face in the growing homeless population that many preferred to ignore. But Marcus still watched over his small corner of the city, helping other homeless individuals when they were sick or injured, using skills that seemed wasted on society's forgotten. What people didn't know was that Marcus carried a small medical kit in his backpack, basic supplies he'd managed to gather over the months: bandages, antiseptic wipes, a small flashlight, and even surgical gloves he'd found discarded outside medical facilities. Old habits die hard, and Marcus couldn't stop being a medic, even without a job title or paycheck. His appearance was rough: weathered skin, graying beard, clothes that had seen better days. But his eyes still held the sharp intelligence and compassion that had made him exceptional in the field. Marcus was the kind of man who would give his last dollar to someone hungrier than himself, who would share his blanket on the coldest nights, who never lost his fundamental belief that every life mattered. The other homeless individuals in the area knew Marcus as someone they could count on. When Sarah, a homeless woman in her 50s, developed pneumonia the previous winter, Marcus had stayed with her for 3 days, monitoring her condition and making sure she got to a hospital when her breathing became critical. When Tommy, a young veteran struggling with addiction, overdosed behind a dumpster, Marcus performed CPR and stayed with him until paramedics arrived. The billionaire's wife, Victoria Sterling, lived in a world that couldn't be more different from Marcus's reality. At 32, she was the wife of Richard Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Technologies, a company worth over $8 billion. Their mansion in Lincoln Park was worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes, complete with a full staff, private security, and every luxury imaginable. Victoria wasn't born into wealth. She'd grown up middle class in Ohio, working her way through college before meeting Richard at a charity gala 7 years earlier. Despite her privileged life, she'd never lost touch with her humble beginnings and was actively involved in several charitable organizations, particularly those helping veterans and homeless individuals. Ironically, she'd been working on funding a new veterans housing initiative for months. She was 8.5 months pregnant with their first child, a baby they'd tried to conceive for 3 years. After multiple fertility treatments and 1 miscarriage, this pregnancy was precious beyond measure. Victoria had the best prenatal care money could buy, a team of top obstetricians, a birth plan at Chicago's most prestigious hospital, and a nursery that looked like something from a magazine. Victoria's charitable work had brought her face to face with homelessness before, but always from a position of safety and privilege. She'd served meals at soup kitchens, written checks to shelters, and attended fundraising galas. She genuinely cared about the cause. But like many wealthy philanthropists, her understanding was largely theoretical. She'd never been truly vulnerable, never experienced what it meant to need help from strangers with no guarantee it would come. On that December evening, Victoria was returning from her final prenatal appointment. Her doctor had assured her everything was perfect. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, and all signs pointed to a smooth delivery when the time came. She was being driven in the family's bulletproof SUV by their regular security driver, James, when Chicago traffic came to a complete standstill on Lakeshore Drive. The crisis unfolds. What started as minor discomfort quickly escalated into unmistakable labor pains. Victoria tried to remain calm, breathing through the contractions as she'd learned in her birthing classes. But when her water broke in the back seat of the SUV, panic set in. The baby was coming now, not in 2 weeks, and they were stuck in traffic that hadn't moved in 20 minutes. James immediately called 911, but the dispatcher delivered devastating news. Every ambulance in the area was tied up with a massive pileup on the interstate. The estimated wait time was 45 minutes minimum. Victoria's contractions were now coming every 2 minutes, intense and overwhelming. She was terrified, crying, and completely unprepared for an emergency delivery. James made the decision to abandon the vehicle and help Victoria walk to the nearest medical facility. But as they left the warmth and safety of the SUV, Victoria collapsed on the sidewalk, crying out in pain as another contraction hit. The December wind was brutal and snow was beginning to fall. She couldn't walk another step. The scene that unfolded next revealed something troubling about human nature. Dozens of people walked past the obviously distressed pregnant woman. Some slowed down, pulled out phones to record what they assumed was just another urban drama, but no one stopped to help. In the city of millions, Victoria Sterling, one of Chicago's wealthiest women, found herself completely alone in her most desperate hour. A well-dressed businessman walked by, talking loudly on his phone about stock prices. A group of college students passed, laughing and taking selfies, barely glancing at the woman in labor on the sidewalk. Even a nurse, identifiable by her scrubs, hurried past with her head down, perhaps assuming someone else would handle the situation or that it wasn't her responsibility outside of work. James was doing his best, but he was a security professional, not a medical expert. He called Richard, who was in meetings in New York and frantically trying to arrange a helicopter. He called the hospital, begging them to send anyone available. But in those critical minutes, as Victoria's labor progressed rapidly, it became clear that help wasn't coming in time. Victoria was lying on the cold sidewalk, her expensive coat spread beneath her, contracting every 90 seconds now. She could feel the baby coming and knew with terrifying certainty that she was going to give birth right there on State Street with only her scared security guard and a growing crowd of gawking strangers. That's when Marcus appeared. The moment everything changed. Marcus had been walking back from the shelter where he'd managed to get dinner when he heard Victoria's cries. His medic instincts kicked in immediately. He could tell from the sound and the body language that this wasn't just someone who needed help getting up. This was active labor, and it was progressing fast. Without hesitation, Marcus approached the scene. James initially tried to wave him away, protective of Victoria and suspicious of a homeless man approaching his employer's wife. The irony wasn't lost on anyone later. The same society that had walked past a woman in labor was now trying to protect her from the one person actually qualified to help. "Sir, I understand your concern, but I'm a trained Army medic with emergency delivery experience. This woman is in active labor, and from what I can see, the baby's coming soon." "I can help," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to taking charge in medical emergencies. James looked at Marcus's weathered appearance, then at Victoria, who was clearly in distress. Victoria herself, through her pain, looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something that gave her hope. competence, compassion, and unshakable confidence. Something in his demeanor convinced her that this was her best chance. "Please," Victoria gasped between contractions. "Help me." Marcus immediately took charge of the situation with military precision. He sent James to find blankets and towels from nearby businesses, giving him specific instructions about what to request and how to explain the medical emergency. He positioned Victoria more comfortably and safely, using his coat to shield her from the wind and creating a small buffer of privacy around them. From his backpack, he retrieved his small medical kit, pulling on surgical gloves as he assessed the situation. The crowd that had been merely gawking now watched in stunned silence. Here was a homeless man, someone they would have stepped around or ignored completely just minutes earlier, taking control of an emergency with the skill and authority of a seasoned professional. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Marcus asked as he worked. "Victoria," she replied between breaths. "Victoria, my name is Marcus. I'm going to take good care of you and your baby. I need you to listen to my voice and follow my instructions. You're doing great, and everything looks normal. The baby's crowning, which means we're almost there." The delivery. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Marcus guided Victoria through each contraction with the expertise of someone who had delivered babies in far more dangerous circumstances. In Afghanistan, he'd helped deliver 3 babies in field conditions, once during a mortar attack, once in a helicopter, and once in a bombed-out building. A Chicago sidewalk, while not ideal, was manageable. "I can see the head," Marcus announced. "The baby has dark hair, Victoria. One more big push and you'll meet your little one." Marcus monitored the baby's position, coached Victoria's breathing, and provided the steady, reassuring presence she desperately needed. He checked for the umbilical cord around the neck, positioned his hands to support the baby's head, and prepared for the shoulders, the most critical part of any delivery. "Perfect, Victoria. The head's out. Now we wait for the shoulders to rotate. Don't push yet. Let your body do the work." The crowd had grown larger, but they were no longer just curious onlookers. Something about Marcus's professional competence had transformed the entire atmosphere. People were genuinely invested in the outcome, quietly cheering Victoria on and watching Marcus work with obvious respect and admiration. "Okay, here we go. One more push for the shoulders." With Marcus's steady hands guiding the process, baby Elizabeth Sterling came into the world at 6:47 p.m. on a snowy sidewalk in downtown Chicago. Marcus immediately cleared the infant's airway using techniques he'd learned in combat medicine, checked her breathing and heart rate, and wrapped her in his own shirt before placing her on Victoria's chest. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. He expertly handled the delivery of the placenta, monitored both mother and baby for any signs of complications, and kept them warm and stable. He used his small flashlight to check the baby's color and responsiveness, satisfied that both patients were doing well. "She's beautiful, Victoria. Perfect APGAR scores from what I can tell. Strong lungs, good color, responding well." When the delayed ambulance finally arrived 12 minutes later, they found a textbook delivery. Mother and baby healthy and stable, all procedures handled with professional expertise. The lead paramedic later said he couldn't have done better himself, even with a fully equipped ambulance. "Who handled the delivery?" the paramedic asked, expecting to find another medical professional. "I did," Marcus replied simply. "Army medic, 3 tours. Both patients are stable." The paramedic looked at Marcus with obvious respect. "Outstanding work, perfect positioning, proper cord care, excellent maternal monitoring. You probably saved both their lives." The immediate aftermath. As Victoria was loaded into the ambulance, she grabbed Marcus's hand. Through tears of relief and gratitude, she said, "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for being there when no one else would help." "What's your name?" "Marcus Thompson, ma'am, and congratulations on your beautiful daughter." "Marcus, I will never forget this. Never." Marcus simply squeezed her hand and replied, "That's what we do for each other. Take care of that little girl." As the ambulance pulled away, Marcus began cleaning up the medical supplies scattered on the sidewalk. The crowd that had gathered was still there, but their attitude had completely changed. Several people approached him, wanting to shake his hand, offer money, or simply say thank you for what they'd witnessed. "That was incredible," said one woman. "Are you really homeless?" Marcus nodded quietly. "Circumstances change, ma'am. Training doesn't." A businessman who had earlier walked past without stopping returned and pressed $100 bill into Marcus's hand. "I'm ashamed I didn't help earlier. You're a better man than I am. We all have different skills," Marcus replied graciously. "I just happen to have the right ones for this situation." James, who had witnessed the entire event, was profoundly moved by what he'd seen. As a security professional, he was trained to assess people quickly, and he realized how wrong his initial judgment of Marcus had been. Before leaving to follow the ambulance to the hospital, he made sure to get Marcus's full name and asked where he could usually be found. "Mr. Sterling is going to want to thank you properly," James said. "What you did today, there aren't words for it." Marcus gathered his belongings and began walking back toward the shelter, but the evening was far from over. Someone in the crowd had live-streamed portions of the delivery, and the video was already spreading across social media. Within hours, Dhaka's homeless hero was trending nationally, and news outlets were scrambling to identify the man who had saved the day. The search. When Richard Sterling's private jet landed at O'Hare Airport at 2 a.m., his first stop wasn't the hospital to see his new daughter. It was to find Marcus Thompson. Richard had watched the live-stream video during his flight, had spoken with James about the details, and had heard Victoria's emotional account of what Marcus had done for their family. "I need to find him," Richard told James as they drove through the early morning streets of downtown Chicago. "This man saved my wife and daughter's lives. I need to thank him." But finding one homeless person in a city of nearly 3 million proved challenging. Marcus didn't have a permanent address, a phone number, or any of the usual ways people stay connected in modern society. Richard and James spent the next morning visiting shelters, soup kitchens, and the areas where homeless populations typically gathered. At the Pacific Garden mission, they finally found someone who knew Marcus well. Sarah, the homeless woman Marcus had helped through pneumonia, recognized Richard from the news coverage that was already starting to appear. "You're looking for Marcus?" she asked. "He's a good man. Best person I know, actually. He saved my life last winter." "Do you know where I can find him?" Richard asked. "He usually comes by for lunch around noon. But mister, I hope you're not here to cause him trouble. Marcus don't deserve nothing but good things." "I'm here to thank him," Richard replied, "and to do a lot more than that." When Marcus arrived at the mission that afternoon, he was surprised to find Richard Sterling waiting for him. The billionaire was sitting quietly at one of the long tables where meals were served, having declined the mission director's offer of a private office for their meeting. "Mr. Thompson," Richard said, standing as Marcus approached. "I'm Richard Sterling. I believe you know my wife." The conversation that followed was private, but those who witnessed it said both men were emotional. Richard later described it as one of the most humbling experiences of his life, meeting the man who had been there for his family when it mattered most. "I can never repay what you did for Victoria and Elizabeth," Richard said, "but I'd like to try." Marcus was gracious, but careful. He'd been disappointed by promises before, and he'd learned not to expect too much from anyone, regardless of their wealth or status. But there was something genuine about Richard Sterling's gratitude that gave him hope. The media storm. By the time Richard found Marcus, the story had exploded across social media and traditional news outlets. The video of the delivery had been viewed millions of times, and reporters were camped outside the hospital where Victoria and baby Elizabeth were recovering. The story struck a powerful chord with people across the country and around the world. Here was a homeless veteran, someone society had essentially discarded, proving his worth in the most dramatic way possible. The contrast between Marcus's circumstances and his heroic actions challenged fundamental assumptions about value, dignity, and character. News anchors struggled with how to present the story. The usual narratives about homelessness didn't apply here. Marcus wasn't struggling with addiction or mental illness in any obvious way. He was simply a trained professional whose life had taken an unfortunate turn and who had maintained his skills and compassion despite his circumstances. Interview requests poured in from major networks, but Marcus was initially reluctant to speak publicly. He was uncomfortable with being called a hero and worried that the attention might be temporary, a brief, feel-good story that would be forgotten when the next news cycle began. Victoria, still recovering in the hospital, made her first public statement about the incident. Marcus Thompson saved our lives, but more than that, he reminded us what true character looks like. When everyone else walked by, he stopped. When everyone else saw a problem, he saw a solution. When everyone else saw differences, he saw a human being who needed help. I will be grateful to him for the rest of my life, and I want the world to know what kind of man he really is. The statement was carefully crafted, but the emotion behind it was genuine. Victoria had been profoundly changed by her experience, not just because of what Marcus had done, but because of how everyone else had failed to act, recognition, and response. Eventually, Marcus agreed to do a limited number of interviews, hoping to use the attention to highlight issues facing homeless veterans. His appearances were remarkable for their grace and humility. Marcus never portrayed himself as a hero, instead emphasizing that he'd simply done what anyone should do when faced with someone in need. "People see the uniform when you're serving," Marcus said in one particularly powerful interview with a major network. "But they don't see you when you're struggling. Homelessness doesn't erase your training, your compassion, or your duty to help others. We're still the same people we always were." When asked about the dozens of people who had walked past Victoria without helping, Marcus was characteristically generous. "I don't judge anyone for not stopping. People are busy, they have their own problems, and not everyone has medical training. I just happened to be in the right place with the right skills at the right time." The interviewer pressed him on whether he felt bitter about his own circumstances, how a trained medic could end up homeless while others lived in luxury. "Bitterness doesn't help anyone," Marcus replied. "Life isn't fair, and everyone's fighting battles you can't see. I try to focus on what I can do to help, not on what I can't change about my situation." The interviews revealed Marcus to be thoughtful, articulate, and remarkably free of the anger or resentment that might be expected from someone in his circumstances. Viewers were struck by his dignity and grace, qualities that seemed at odds with stereotypes about homelessness. A new foundation. The Sterling family's response went far beyond gratitude. Within a week of the incident, Richard announced the creation of the Marcus Thompson Foundation, dedicated to veteran housing and healthcare services. The foundation's initial funding was $10 million, with a commitment to add $5 million annually. Marcus showed us that heroism and competence don't depend on circumstances, Richard said at the foundation's launch. "There are thousands of veterans living on our streets, many with skills and experience that could benefit our communities if they just had the support they needed." The foundation's approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Housing first, no questions asked, with wraparound services including healthcare, job training, and counseling available, but not required. The program was designed based on Marcus's input and the experiences of other homeless veterans who were consulted during the planning process. But perhaps more importantly, Richard offered Marcus a position as the Foundation's Director of Veteran Services. The role would involve developing programs, advocating for policy changes, and serving as a liaison between the Foundation and the veterans it served. Marcus initially hesitated, worried about accepting what might seem like charity. He'd maintained his independence and dignity throughout his homelessness, and he didn't want to be seen as someone who had been rescued by a wealthy family. Victoria was the one who convinced him to accept. During one of her visits to see him, she made an argument that resonated. "This isn't charity, Marcus. This is a job offer based on your qualifications and experience. You have something that money can't buy, credibility with the population we're trying to serve. The Foundation needs your expertise, not the other way around. transformation and growth. 6 months after that snowy December evening, Marcus Thompson was living in a comfortable apartment, working in a job that utilized his medical training and advocacy skills, and had become a national spokesperson for veteran issues. The transformation was dramatic, but those who knew him said his fundamental character hadn't changed at all. The Foundation's first major project was a 200-unit housing complex for homeless veterans. With on-site medical and mental health services, Marcus was intimately involved in the design process, ensuring that the facility respected residents' dignity and autonomy while providing necessary support services. Too many programs treat homeless people like children who can't make decisions for themselves, Marcus explained to the architects and social workers involved in the project. These are adults who've served their country. They deserve respect and choices, even if they need help. The housing complex opened to great fanfare, but Marcus was most proud of the 85% success rate in transitioning residents to independent living. The key, he said, was treating people as individuals with unique needs and strengths, rather than applying one-size-fits-all solutions. Marcus also reconnected with family members who had lost touch during his years on the streets. His sister in Ohio, who had tried repeatedly to help him during his darkest periods, was overjoyed to see him stable and thriving again. His relationship with his teenage nephew, who had been ashamed of his homeless uncle, was gradually rebuilt as the young man began to understand the complexity of his uncle's journey. An unlikely friendship. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome of that December evening was the genuine friendship that developed between Marcus and the Sterling family. This wasn't a patronizing relationship between wealthy benefactors and a grateful recipient. It was a real friendship based on mutual respect and affection. Victoria often visited the Foundation offices, not for photo opportunities or board meetings, but for informal conversations with Marcus about everything from parenting to politics to their shared love of old movies. She valued his perspective and found his honesty refreshing in a world where people often told her what they thought she wanted to hear. Marcus became a regular guest at Sterling family gatherings, initially feeling out of place in their elegant Lincoln Park home, but gradually becoming comfortable as he realized they genuinely wanted him there. Baby Elizabeth's first word, according to family legend, was Ma, her attempt at saying Marcus's name. Richard and Marcus developed a friendship based on their shared commitment to the Foundation's work, but it went beyond professional collaboration. Richard said Marcus taught him more about leadership and service than any business school or corporate consultant ever had. Marcus leads by example, Richard explained. He doesn't ask anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself, and he treats everyone with the same respect, whether they're a board member or a homeless veteran just coming off the streets. The friendship also provided Marcus with something he'd lost during his years of homelessness, a sense of belonging and family. While he maintained his independence and continued his advocacy work, having people who genuinely cared about his well-being provided stability and emotional support that had been missing from his life. Broader impact. The story's impact extended far beyond one family and one homeless veteran. The video of the delivery went viral globally, inspiring countless acts of kindness and charity. Homeless shelters across the country reported increased donations and volunteer hours, with many people saying they'd been moved by Marcus's story. Medical schools began incorporating emergency childbirth into their curricula. Partly inspired by Marcus's demonstration of these skills, several teaching hospitals developed partnerships with veteran organizations to tap into the medical expertise that exists among homeless and underemployed veterans. The story also sparked conversations about how society treats its most vulnerable members. Op-ed writers, social commentators, and policymakers used Marcus's example to argue for better veteran services, housing-first approaches to homelessness, and programs that recognize and utilize the skills that homeless individuals possess. The Marcus Thompson story forces us to confront our assumptions, wrote one prominent columnist. How many other skilled, capable people are we overlooking because of their circumstances? How many potential heroes are we walking past every day? The hashtag Nash Heroism Has No Address became a rallying cry for homeless advocacy groups and veteran organizations worldwide. It was used to highlight stories of other individuals who had overcome difficult circumstances to help their communities, creating a movement that celebrated unrecognized heroes. Long-term changes. 5 years later, the changes sparked by that December evening continue to expand. The Marcus Thompson Foundation has helped transition over 3,000 veterans from homelessness to stable housing, with a success rate that far exceeds national averages. The foundation has expanded to 12 major cities, with plans for further growth. The foundation's approach has influenced policy at the federal level, with several cities adopting similar housing-first programs. Marcus regularly testifies before Congress on veteran health care and homelessness issues, his measured and thoughtful approach earning him respect across party lines. Victoria Sterling has authored a book about her experience, with proceeds going to the foundation. She's also launched a podcast focused on stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, using her platform to highlight unrecognized heroes in communities across America. The Sterling family's approach to philanthropy was permanently altered by their experience. Rather than simply donating money to established charities, they began focusing on direct engagement with beneficiaries and programs that address root causes of social problems. Most importantly, the story continues to inspire individual acts of kindness and compassion. Social workers report that references to Marcus Thompson and his example come up regularly in their interactions with clients and volunteers. The story has become shorthand for the idea that everyone has something valuable to contribute, regardless of their circumstances. The enduring message. The story of Marcus Thompson and Victoria Sterling represents something fundamentally hopeful about human nature. In a world often focused on division and difference, their experience demonstrates that compassion and competence transcend social boundaries. When crisis struck, training and character mattered more than bank accounts or addresses. Marcus never set out to be a hero. He simply did what his training and conscience told him was right. Victoria never intended to become an advocate for the homeless. She was just a grateful mother who couldn't forget the kindness shown to her family. Their story resonates because it shows how ordinary people can create extraordinary change through simple human decency. The incident also highlights systemic issues that society continues to grapple with. How many other Marcus Thompsons are living on the streets, their skills and experience wasted because of inadequate support systems? How many emergency situations go unaddressed because trained individuals are overlooked due to their circumstances? Yet the story's ultimate message is one of hope and possibility. It shows that second chances are possible, that society can learn and change, and that individual actions can create ripple effects that transform entire communities. Most importantly, it reminds us that heroism isn't about perfection or privilege. It's about showing up when others need help, regardless of our own circumstances. Today, Marcus Thompson continues his work with quiet dignity. Elizabeth Sterling is a happy 5-year-old who calls him Uncle Marcus. And the Marcus Thompson Foundation continues to prove that when we see past circumstances to character, everyone wins. Their story stands as a permanent reminder that heroism has no address. It lives in the hearts of those willing to act when action is needed, carrying nothing but their humanity and the unshakable belief that every life matters.